Hello and welcome to another Cinema 4D tutorial. My name is Ricardo Silva. Today I want to talk to you about a specific part of the materials that is called the Fresnel effect. To begin with, in Cinema 4D, the Fresnel effect or Fresnel shader reacts according to the camera viewing angle of each polygon on a 3D object. And it can be used to control how the textures react to either transparency or color or whatever, but everything is depending on the viewing angle. You probably have been going through a freeway. Far away, you're going to see some reflections that they may appear as a mirage or water on the road. And then when you're driving and you get there, you're going to notice that it actually is dry. That is the physical effect called Fresnel effect. Now, the Fresnel effect works depending on how the polygons of an object or the surface of an object is looking at the camera or the point of view. When the viewing angle is close to 90 degrees, then that's when the effect is the strongest. But if the viewing angle is 0, then that's when the effect is the least. Now, in Cinema 4D, when you apply the Fresnel effect, you are going to see a gradient. And the gradient goes from white to black. And the white part, or the number 1 part in here, corresponds to the viewing angle of 90 degrees, meaning that that's where the polygons that are not facing the camera are going to be in, the strongest in that effect. And the number 2, it corresponds to the other viewing angle of 0, meaning that there is not going to be effect like that. So the Fresnel effect is controlled by using a gradient like this. Now let's go ahead in Cinema 4D and create one of those materials. So I have a tube in here. If I render, it has the default texture. So I'm going to take that tube and I'm going to create a copy of it right here. Okay. So the first tube, I'm going to call that a reflective tube. So tube reflective. Okay. That tube is the one on the left, and the material that I'm going to create is going to be a reflective texture. And I'm going to apply that texture to the tube. Right now, the default of this material has no reflection whatsoever. So I'm going to go to the reflectance channel, and I'm going to add a normal Beckman reflection channel from the new version. And for that, I'm going to go to the layer mask and enable the texture Fresnel. Just by default, without any tweaks or anything, I can see in the icon that the polygons in front are not reflecting any of the 3D environment, while the ones on the outside of the sphere, they are reflecting. So let me close this and do a quick render. And you're going to see that in here we see most of the reflection happening on the edges or the polygons that are not facing the camera. So you will see that these polygons that are very close to face the camera are probably the least reflective ones. Okay, so like I said, because it is controlled by a gradient, that means that I can control how much of that reflection and where is that going to happen. So I'm going to double click on my texture again to open it up. And I'm going to go inside that layer mask and inside the Fresnel shader. And I'm going to tighten up this effect, meaning that I am making that gradient a lot more pronounced and towards the white. So if I render this, that means that I'm going to get less reflection on precisely on this area. So I'm restricting how many of these polygons are very reflective, as you can see here. Now I could go back and expand it and maybe make it really, really reflective, except that the ones that are really close to the camera or facing the camera are not going to be reflecting that much, just like I see it here. So just by moving this gradient, I am able to control what parts of the object or polygons that are facing the camera are more or less reflective. Okay, so I'm going to just leave it by default, something like that. Now, when I said that this effect is depending on the camera, notice that these polygons over here are not being reflective at all. And if I move my camera on this angle, now those polygons are going to reflect a lot. The ones on top are the ones that are not reflecting at all. So now you can see that depending on how the camera is positioned in relation to the object, they do or do not reflect. And that is the basics of the Fresnel effect. Now, this works perfectly for things like this. This could be a porcelain cup or anything. In this case, it's just a solid thing. But what about in transparencies? In transparencies, the Fresnel effect works in reverse. So let me go ahead and create a new material. And this material I'm going to call glass. And I'm going to apply that glass to the other tube. So in that case, I'm going to call this tube number 1 transparent. Or actually, I'm going to call it glass. So we know glass is transparent. Okay, so I haven't tweaked that texture at all. So I'm going to open that up. And I am not going to the reflectance. I'm actually going to the transparency. By enabling the transparency, now my object is completely transparent. So indeed, it's just giving me the specularity of the transparency, but nothing else. So if I go here to the refraction and I say, okay, give me some refraction. This is some sort of glass that bends the light. But at the same time, I am going to go to the texture and enable the Fresnel effect. And remember, by default, the Fresnel effect gives me more of the effect on the outside than the inside, meaning the polygons that are facing the camera are the ones that are going to have the least amount of effect. But glass works in the other way around. It should be more transparent in the center than on the outside. So that means that I'm going to have to go and dig inside the Fresnel effect and right-click and invert those nuts. Now, when I render, I'm going to see a glass. So that way, if I get really close, I can see that indeed this part over here, the ones on the outside of in this case, this glass, basically is not transparent. But the one that is inside here is much transparent than the outside. And just like before, I can actually double click on my transparency, go inside the Fresnel, and tighten that up. Meaning that only the polygons that are really outside, not facing the camera, are the ones that are going to be really nice and solid, but the ones inside are going to be really transparent. So I can see that very clearly here. If I go and look at this area over here, I don't see transparency, but inside here I do. Okay. Now if I move this the other way, tighten that up towards the right side, notice that basically I'm saying that most of the polygons not facing the camera and the ones that are kind of like 50% facing the camera are not going to be transparent. So if I render this, only the ones that are really, really close to looking at the camera are going to be transparent. So if I position my camera right here, only the ones facing the camera are going to be transparent. So I'm controlling much of this. Okay. So when you are working with glass or something like that, you probably want to have something like this so it looks more realistic. And then if you want to apply a reflection to this glass as well, then you're going to use the same exact idea as I was explaining here with the Fresnel in the reverse order as the transparency. Okay, so this is very important for texturing using the Fresnel effect, and I hope you understand what I meant with this tutorial. But if you still have doubts or questions about the Fresnel effect, the uses of it, or things like that, write down your comments down here and let me know what you think. So I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.